And welcome to Theorizing with a Hammer. And today we're going to talk about alienation. While technically, actually, in some ways, even a larger concept than reification, this third video in our series will explore alienation. So, other things that we talk about in regards to ideology and other forms of Marxist reification can be made clearer. Alienation is a deceptively simple concept. And to understand it, we just can look at the structure of a sentence. I move that. I being the subject having the power of both perception and agency, act on the object, which is something which I act upon. Now, being able to act on that object, I realize that that object, as perceived by me, is separate from me. This is, at first, a very simple concept. It's incredibly simple, actually. But when you realize that other objects may act and are separate from you, you begin to realize that you can also be somebody else's object. And this causes a sense of division, of tension, of alienation. This is most thoroughly explored in early German idealist philosophy in Hegel's Phenomenology of the Spirit. And this is key to understanding many developments in Marxism. After all, objectification and reification emerges from alienation. And in some ways, I probably should have started with this concept, but it's easier to understand once you've looked at other things. So, for example, how money is a thing that represents a social relationship, or a complex of social relationships, a complex of power relations. And frankly, it doesn't matter if you accept Marxism or not, that's true in any set of theories about money. It has three functions. All those functions have social relations entailed in them. So it is a thing that represents those social relations. But you are alienated from those social relations, embodied in the symbol, in the physical thing of money. Now, I will probably do a different series on various theories of money, as not to confuse people in the future. But here we look at our third series, our third step in understanding reification, and we're staying in Marxism now. But let's break down that complicated idea, because the simple idea that I realize that I can be both a subject and object, and thus I am divided from something, I am differentiated from it, it moves away from me. It's a very basic step. I can move my glasses, I can act upon it, but if my glasses act upon me, it's also an agent. Right? We understand the difference between subject objects and object objects, right? So things that cannot have agency and things that seem to have agency. Now, we're not going to get into whether or not agency is counter-causal or self-causal or any of that. Those are questions for metaphysical philosophy. What matters here that you understand this concept, because it really becomes important in Marxism. Marx takes the theory of alienation as transferred from the other left Hegelians or young Hegelians, so such as Ludwig Feuerbach and Max Stirner, and clarifies it in the context of political economy. This is really begins to be stated clearly in the economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844. And under capitalism, there are four primary types of alienation. Right? We have this general alienation, which is always with us. We always are alienated from other subjects. But we have ways around that alienation. Intersubjectivity, realizing that the subject, that if we both can be objectified, we also can both be subjectified. There's all kinds of ways that you can deal with psychological alienation. And in fact, in some ways, psychological alienation is crucial to having any self-identity whatsoever. You cannot have self-identity if you cannot differentiate yourself from other agents. But when you take that same basic principle and look at it in the context of social relations as a whole, as we did when we talked about the commodity fetish in our last video, you can see how this can be a little bit more complicated in Marx. And indeed, reifications, our primary topic of the series, is in some ways, in Marx's theory, and Marx's refinement of the German idealism, and trying to remove the idealism from it, starts to place more problematic divisions than just the differentiation of the self. In some ways, Marx states this best in a comment on James Mill, where he explained alienation as such. Let us suppose that we carried out production as human beings. Each one of us would have, in two ways, affirmed himself and the other person. In my production, I would have objectified my individuality, its specific character, and therefore enjoyed not only an individual manifestation of my life during the activity, but also, while looking at the object, I would have the individual pleasure of knowing my personality to be objective, visible to the senses, and hence a power beyond all doubt. I'm speaking here. Note that this is actually a kind of reification. I have made my personality manifest through my labor into something that uniquely represents me. It is now expressed as an objective thing, and the objective and subjective distinction is kind of clarified. All right, that's a good form of reification, according to Marx. But let's continue on the comment. In your enjoyment or use of my product, I would have direct enjoyment of being conscious of having satisfied a human need by my work, that is, of having objectified man's essential nature, and of having thus created an object corresponding to the need of another man's essential nature, our products so many mirrors in which we saw reflected in our essential nature. Thus, if I make a product under my free, labor, here, not compelled labor power, that reflects my personality and interest, and you enjoy that product of your free enjoyment, I have bridged something. We have taken something from ourselves, created it in the world in the objective form, and shared it. Thus, recognizing not just that we are both people, it can make things, but that you appreciate part of me. Now, when this gets twisted in different modes of production, and we're going to limit ourselves to capitalism right now as a mode of production, we have alienation from our product. Why are we alienated from our product? Because we are not making a product purely on our own design. If we are working for a wage, we're making a product of someone else's design. We might have ways to improve it, but we can't do that unilaterally. Thus, we are alienated from the product of our labor because we don't have total control over it. That's one form of alienation that Marx identifies that happens in capital. The second form that Marx identifies is alienation, in a negative sense, from the act of production, because as production is more specialized and my role in labor power is more limited to a singular thing that I am doing, either in the factory model or even in like a restaurant. And I used to work on a pizza service line. I threw dough. That's what I did. I do not complete the whole of the product for efficiency reasons. But because of that, I am alienated from the satisfaction of production. I might not ever even see the particular products I am finishing and know they are mine. Thus, my physical and mental energy that I would take to build something loses a lot of its immediate gratification. And anyone who crafts for a hobby knows this. If I craft for a hobby, I have total control over what I'm making. People can enjoy it or not enjoying it, but I have the satisfaction of knowing I did it. When I make a pizza at home for my consumption or my family's consumption, and I have a total specification, I have that satisfaction. Now, it's not a very efficient way to work. And this is one of the innovations of capitalism. But that innovation of itself, because of my lack of control of it, and because even like representatively, because my class doesn't own the means of production, I don't have any say in, or not much say in what this final product is, and thus not much sense of identification with its completion. So I am thus cut off from production itself. I am thus alienated from it. Then Marx says that we are alienated from other workers. Why are we alienated from other workers? Because instead of working together with them for mutual benefit, which we may limitedly do, because we have to compete to sell our labor power and have to compete for wages, and thus Marx lays out a basis of something that could be seen in later sociological theorists like Max Weber or Tilly. A reason to compete against other workers for better wages and for a better job position and for more social power within the workplace, thus taking someone who should be my natural ally because we share so much of our lives with the same kinds of things that we do, and separating me from them in pure competition. And not competition that is necessarily there's certain kinds of competition, right, that we experience that's good, but this is not that, because our survival is more literally dependent on it. It is different to compete in a game when there's nothing, nothing like our livelihood at stake. It changes the nature of the competition, and that is a third form of alienation. And the final form of alienation in Marx is back to this bigger, almost gestalt one, and that is the alienation from our species being, our human nature. It is a myth that Marxists do not, or that Marx did not believe in something like a human nature. But Marx thought that human nature was always mitigated by the modes of production in which we work in. So our human nature can only express in so many different ways because of the social limitations of which we created, and the social limitations are tied into the way we reproduce ourselves, thus our economic activity. And this is actually ahead of the game for Marx, because this is something we can actually even see in non-human animals. I'll give you an example. Alpha and beta wolf behavior. We always studied wolves in captivity and thought that the alpha beta wolf behavior that we saw in male wolves was the nature of wolf interaction, until recent studies of wild wolves proved that wolves not in captivity operate completely differently in their complexity of social structure and how they interact. There's not one singular alpha and a bunch of betas. The model that we observed and thus assumed was wolf nature constrained by captivity. Social constraints of production and of other things, like the way people act in prison versus the way they act when they're free, changes and limits how we can express our nature, thus alienating us from our true being. And alienated from our true being, we see that we have major issues that emerge from this. The modes of production can change the way we interact. It can change the way we relate to ourselves. This is a crucial point in Marxism. Reification emerges because of this alienation. We try to make ourselves manifested in objects to manifest ourselves in the world, but we're also estranged from that object from the social limitations put on us. That's not necessarily always bad. The reification that Marx describes in A Comment on Mill, it would be positive reification that would actually act against some form of alienation, but that's not what we have under our current mode of production, or most of the ones we've existed in the past. It's important to note, though, that we may never be able to breach all forms of alienation, and maybe we don't even want to. Like I said earlier on, our sense of self is rooted in that primary alienation. It can even show up in, when a infant realizes that it's not identified, it is a separate being from its mother. This is how we grow as individuals. But these social alienations that we see that Marx describes under capitalism and other modes of production, according to Marx, are damaging. And to deal with that, we must shatter the assumption that these alienations that Marx describes in Capital are natural. And eternal. Those are idols which we have to shatter. And this has been Theorizing with a Hammer. If you got something out of us, like and subscribe. Theorizing with a Hammer is produced here on Zero Books twice a month and generally released on Mondays. If you'd like to find my other work, we have Pop the Left, generally released bi-monthly with me and Doug Lane on Thursdays. You can find my work at Mortal Science and at Varn Blog. And you can always come back here and find more content. I hope you found this helpful, and keep on smashing those idols in your head.
Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.